that you automatically I think everybody's in. So, hi, everybody, and welcome to today's program. We are recording the session, which will be available between 24 and 48 hours after its conclusion. And that will be available via direct link. So you will have to email me to get that link. My name is Lauren Obach. I'm the Adult and Teen Services Librarian at the Edith Wheeler Memorial Library. Today's program, America and Afghanistan 2021, is hosted by Arthur Gottlieb and is sponsored by our friends of the library. Any questions that you have during the program, just pop them into that chat and I'll be able to see the questions right away. We'll take questions at the end, and if there's time during the program, we'll take questions at that time also. We are using AI-assisted closed captioning, which you can turn off at any time by pressing the CC button at either the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your device. I will be here the entire time, so if you run into tech problems, feel free to send me a direct message or an email, and I'll walk you through how to connect. So our program today is America and Afghanistan 2021. On August 16th, news reached the US that Taliban troops had gained control of Kabul after the Afghan president fled the country. Waging a charm offensive, the Taliban announced that they were ushering in a new, more peaceful and liberal era. In contrast to this harmonious message, news agencies flooded viewers with images of soldiers lifting babies over walls, people rushing the Kabul airport, and scared citizens clinging to military aircrafts. These deeply disturbing images prompted many of us to frankly ask, what happened? Today, we have one of our most trusted presenters here to help our community process the grief, anger, and confusion of the last week and the 20 years leading up to it. Arthur Gottlieb is a local historian on subjects of political and military history. He served as an auxiliary officer of the US Coast Guard for 17 years. He is also a certified senior advisor and counselor who works pro bono with veterans who are returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. He is currently partway through another series hosted by the library, America's Revolutionary War. He is here today to present America and Afghanistan 2021.
Okay, good morning, everyone. For those of you who aren't familiar with me as a presenter, I just wanted to give a slight background so that'll give you an idea of the frame of reference I bring to this subject and other subjects. It's important everyone has a point of view. It's important for us to understand what our points of view are and what informs those points of view, not only individually for you out there in the audience, but you should know this about me also, which I'm about to share. I have a unique combination of perspectives, two in particular. The two main facets that I look at things through are my experience as a person in this field of psychology and clinical social work, which has been my major academic study. But I took a long hiatus from that to do something that was a love of my life, which was working with the United States Navy and the Marine Corps primarily, and the other armed services for a period of 9 years. In that regard, I was in charge of veteran outreach and liaison to for the Intrepid Sea Air Space Museum in Manhattan to all of the different veterans organizations. So I'm very, very familiar with veterans' concerns. And as somebody who was a commander in the auxiliary force of the Coast Guard, between that and what I did with the Navy, I've been around the military for a total of 27 years. So I was pretty immersed in the culture. I am not a combat veteran, but I certainly have a lot of experience being around a lot of other people who were, and this informs me. Now, even my psychological background, this is important as it has to do with today's presentation, and that's why I'm taking the time to tell you, is that when I was doing all of my work in the 1980s for psychology, and then later for clinical social work, I worked with any number of Vietnam veterans. And I mention that to you because many of these people were in treatment programs. I was a drug and alcohol and remain a drug and alcohol abuse counselor, et cetera, is one of my tags. And I'm familiar with the fallout of what at that point in history, our history in the 1980s, the 1990s, was America's longest war, Vietnam. So there is, as you know, a parallel between the fall of Saigon in 1975 and what we are witnessing play out in real time in front of us now. That is very important. One of the questions I have on my own bullet point here is what will be the fallout for United States and coalition, that is NATO allies that fought alongside Americans and Afghani soldiers as a result of what many would characterize as a surrender to the Taliban after a 20-year effort and many Americans and coalition forces, not the least of which were the Afghan army, having died for something. And one of the psychological parts about this is that if we fought for something, what has it been thrown away at the end? That is not an opinion that I'm making. I am putting that out there as a point. Now, today, I know that there's going to be a lot of emotionality. Unfortunately, today's program isn't going to be one that is going to be a support group on this subject, but I do expect people to have some opinions and to have some venting that they might want to do. I only ask that you don't make any ad hominem attacks, personal attacks on politicians or anything else like that. It's not useful, even though you might feel that way. We have policy issues that I would like to stick with, all right? So the policy issue of President Biden, the policy issue of the former administration, the policy issue of George W. Bush, the policy issues of one Barack Obama. Okay, that's the way we'll handle it, all right? So I am going to, just as an introduction, in a collage fashion, go down a list, 4-page list of stuff that I literally just off the top of my head wrote on this piece of paper, okay? And I did this last night. There is some of this that is, I would say, might even be considered obsolete. As you know, had you been watching the television before you tuned on with us today, that there has been about 45 minutes ago at this point, a bomb that had gone off, set off, we think, by something called ISIS-K. And there were warnings last night. So apparently we still have intelligence on the ground enough to tell us that there was an imminent attack. So the same people, Americans and those who were seeking refuge from Taliban rule and trying to get to the Kabul airport, while practically simultaneously we've been saying, get to the airport. Now it's don't get to the airport because it's not safe to be near the airport. And our experience in Afghanistan, our collective experience in Afghanistan as of 45 minutes ago, in my opinion, has entered probably its final phase of evacuation, because these explosions have put us now in a different category of what we're dealing with there at the airport, at Kabul airport, our only operational way in and out of Afghanistan. The deadline that President Biden has verified that he's going to hold to is going to be August 31st. Today is August 26th. And I was just stopping to think, I don't know if there's a day time difference or something like that. I'm not geographically time savvy enough to know that, but one day forward or after, if you know what I mean, going around the world, it doesn't really matter. Because for us to be able to get out of there by August 31st, that means that the civilian evacuation has to be done before that, because now the last thing that's going to have to be done is for us to collect our 6,000 or 7,000 American service people and our aircraft and then get out of there afterwards. So to do the military evacuation by the 31st, that means that the civilian evacuation has to be done probably 2 days before that. Okay, so 2 days before the 31st would be the 29th, which means a couple of days from now. And who knows what that's going to look like based on what we saw this morning. ISIS-K is something I never heard of before about 3 days ago. And ISIS-K apparently is just a local designation of an ISIS group from, I think it's northeastern Afghanistan. And the thing is with the Taliban and ISIS is that the Taliban and ISIS are actually warring factions. So ISIS, there's two things here. Either ISIS is acting independently of the Taliban in these suicide attacks. And I'm using that as the plural because I believe that this isn't the last one. And maybe I'll be wrong about that, but you'll forgive me if I'm not. So ISIS either is acting in conjunction with the Taliban. So the Taliban can make it seem as though they're not causing trouble. They're really a new, better Taliban, not the Taliban of 20 years ago. And they're just trying to be a responsible government. And meanwhile, you have these crazy Al-Qaeda people, and that's how they are. What are you going to do? You see, or the Taliban is allowing ISIS to do these things independently because really they're in simpatico, because the greater enemy of both ISIS and the Taliban is the West, represented, of course, by the United States of America. You see, so it's kind of like, even though the Taliban and ISIS are both enemies, they both have a greater enemy to each of them. And then therefore, that makes them unlikely allies, you see? And then once the United States is gone and the West is gone, then they can go back to fighting each other. ISIS traditionally has been, and many of some such groups, of course, Al-Qaeda as well, you remember them, they seem to like to have anniversary dates to humiliate their opponents, you see. So this whole business of us coming up to the 20th anniversary of September, the September terrorist attacks of 2001, 9/11, is something that's on everyone's mind, I think. Personally, I don't know why President Biden actually chose that date initially, and then he walked that back and made it a little bit earlier. I think that was going to show a sign of success that we, after 20 years on 9/11, we have successfully neutralized Afghanistan as a haven for terrorism. But in a terrible twist of fate, it is actually practically inverted in its optics. And now on September 11th, 2001, we will have the Taliban flag flying over the United States Embassy and representing the actual victory of the Taliban, if you will, after our suppressing them for 20 years on the anniversary of 9/11. See, a lot of this is very psycho-emotional, and forgive me for the psychological jargon, but you all know what that means. This is emotional for people. It is emotional for people, not only because of the overlap of the anniversary of 9/11, not only with the remembrance of the humiliation of the fall of Saigon in 1975 and how we were never going to let that happen again. And I will understand if you disagree with me, but it is my opinion that the world right now, as we see it at this moment from a global terrorism standpoint, that we are now less safe than we were right before 9/11, because this is not 20 years ago, it is now, and as a result of the Taliban perceiving, and rightly so, a victory over the largest Western power, supposedly us, that is, the most sophisticated military in the world with the most expensive weapons and the greatest resources, that the Taliban, the sandal-wearing Taliban, have defeated us. And therefore, will Afghanistan actually become the poster country that if you want to be a terrorist against the West and you want to engage in jihad against the West, then, well, Afghanistan's the place to go. And the big question becomes is, will Afghanistan become a new haven for this kind of terrorism? You see, and remember that in 2001, it was also technologically a different world from the standpoint is like Al-Qaeda, who actually planned the attack, even though the Taliban, if you heard this interview with the Taliban spokesperson yesterday, I forgot who it was, I think it was CBS or I don't know, somebody. The Taliban spokesperson said there's no evidence that Osama bin Laden had anything to do with the attacks on 9/11. So that being their point of view, so they were like, well, if that's the case, then America attacked Afghanistan for what? Because they were angry at somebody and they decided to go over and kill some people that didn't look like them or didn't dress like them. So if that's the way they perceive it, then they certainly see themselves as innocent victims and righteous in their desire and justification for revenge against the West, because we attacked them because we were shooting from the hip, and it was really unjustified for us to invade Afghanistan, let alone Iraq, which is another story I won't talk about today. And so this is actually from multi-level thing. I'm going to read some of the things I have in my notepad here. And these are this is straight consciousness of thinking right off of my part. And sometimes it's good just to do things this way. And then this will just jog some of our thoughts, some of our memories. I'm going to stop on a regular basis, and I'm going to ask Lauren to pick up some comments. Okay, so if you've got a couple of questions as I'm going along, go ahead and put them in the chat room and we'll see what we've got, okay? And in my answering your questions, it'll actually serve as a good format to put our program in context, right? Which is really our primary goal today. Many of the things that we're talking about today are in the context of our own politics, right? Because this is America and we're hyper-focused on ourselves a lot of the times. I don't mean that you directly, but as a society we are. We're very media-driven, and we have taken politics in the United States to the level of an Olympic sport. And all of you know that if you watch the news for a living like I do. I do these current event programs, have been doing them for almost 15 years. And it's been a real staple of some of the stuff that I'm doing. So let's just put things in context. We have a new president who's been in office for 7 months or thereabouts. And he and his administration have been brought in under the rhetoric of being the new adults in the room with a long history of seasoned professionals for the State Department and the Department of Defense and their point of view, and a very, very long history of experience dealing with international issues, right? So in other words, the last guy was a rank amateur who was deeply flawed in his character and his morals. And we are the new people that are going to bring our higher selves and a literal dream team to bear. Okay. Now, whether you like the former presidents or you don't, or you like the current president or you don't, I think that is a fair assessment of the context of setting up a level of expectations for now President Obama, rather President Biden and his administration. You see, so with these kind of expectations that people often set themselves up for, that they're now measured by, and I believe that is the context right now for President Biden. And there's a number of things just recently, because all of this was apparently unanticipated as far as these blitzkrieg, if you know what that term means, this lightning war that the Taliban actually put into place over the last 3, 4, or 5 weeks. That was unexpected. Apparently the idea was to have the Afghani army and the Afghani government be in the central position of administration and governance in Afghanistan. And the Taliban was going to be there. It's kind of like having a government, and then it's understood that really the place is run by, you know, their version of organized crime, right? So it's kind of like you've got the government and the army, but everybody knows that, you know, this family, this crime family really runs the whole place, you see, and that would be the Taliban, or at least that's the way I looked at it. You know, so it's kind of like this understanding that this was going to be like this dual governance, but the Afghani army and the Afghani government was going to be there, you see. So therefore we wouldn't have what we've seen. It was not anticipated that the Taliban was literally going to be running the whole place, and that everything was going to snap right back to Sharia law and everything else like that. But that's what happened. And I believe that everybody was taken by surprise. One of the largest notions is this hypothetical equivalence of whether or not President Trump was still in office, or in office for a second term, which obviously he isn't. Whether or not there would have been any difference, because the decision was already there to remove our forces from Afghanistan. So what would have been the difference had Donald J. Trump done it or Joe Biden did it? So in other words, that this was whatever just happened and is going to happen, just happened to happen under President Biden's watch. But it shouldn't be compared to anybody else, because the decision was already been made to leave. And therefore, if a different president was in place, the same thing would have happened anyway, you see. So that is something in psychology we refer to as a rationalization, all right? And it's a hypothetical, all right? So if you're somebody who is less critical of Donald J. Trump than many people are, you would say, well, Trump wouldn't have allowed that to happen. He had a conditions-based response on paper, where that meant that a good assessment would be going on in real time on the ground to determine our leaving or not leaving, or how many people were there. And the withdrawal date, whatever that would have been, would not have been the guiding principle of what would happen. It would be conditions on the ground, and then a determination would be made, instead of the date being made regardless of the condition on the ground. leading to kind of what some might consider a willful blindness of what's going on, you see. So on July 8th, not that long ago, President Biden had said the likelihood that there's going to be a Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely. So that creates another situation for us. And these are things, by the way, that don't feel bad if we don't have the answers for these things right now, because nobody does. Apparently, nobody does. Maybe people we hoped would don't. But I can tell you right now that people who are getting paid a lot more than me know little more than I do, apparently. All right. Sarcasm noted. All right. So was it the intelligence community that handed us another zero? Was it the Pentagon that didn't anticipate what they should have anticipated? Or was it President Biden, who has accepted responsibility in the fact that it was his call to make this withdrawal, holding on to the deadline and under his parameters that he gave to the military? Now, the military in our country is run by the civilian authority, in other words, the Biden administration, Department of Defense, etc. Another piece of context would be that only a few weeks ago, in July, June, we were hyper-focused and on things like making sure that the United States military was not infected with domestic terrorists with viewpoints that might be detrimental to the country. That the Secretary of Defense earlier in the year ordered a complete stand down of the entire United States military forces, right, from the Space Force all the way down to the Coast Guard, to assess internal threats. The Department of Homeland Security only 2 weeks ago issued at the top of its threat level people who opposed COVID vaccines and COVID measures. So another larger question would have to be asked: has our eye not been really on the ball as far as perhaps what the military should be focusing on, which is conducting and fighting wars, and a little too much on the psychosocial issues and social justice within the military? Biden said that the buck stops with me, all right? A phrase, of course, you remember or you know from your history from the redoubtable Harry S. Truman. Give him hell, Harry. But in the same speech, President Biden said that, well, if it wasn't for the Afghan government running away, and if it wasn't for the Afghan soldiers running away, and if it wasn't for all of those Americans who inexplicably just decided to stay behind, and if it wasn't for Donald J. Trump, well, none of this would have happened. But I'm accepting responsibility for it. You see, so I'm mentioning that not as a slam to President Biden, but just to say that it is added to the flavor of some of this. In the same way that I was critical of Donald J. Trump for making many what I would call unforced errors, I think that Donald J. Trump over his presidency created half the problems he had on his own from his own communication style. And I think that President Biden has not helped himself by, when he has been at the microphone, some of the things that has become apparent about what obviously his priorities are or what his real feelings are. Okay. It is the administration's responsibility, be it Republican or Democrat, to try and neutralize that with their, public relations shop. And I would say that this public relations shop is working overtime. All right. Coming into this whole thing, even during the election of 2020, many people I know felt as though, well, whatever deficits now President Biden might have, it's going to be okay because he's surrounded with so many professionals that it'll be fine. Where Donald J. Trump was so flawed in character and so corrupt, and to many people so evil, that it really doesn't matter that even if some mistakes are made with Joe Biden, it's still worth it because Donald Trump's not president. Now, we know that in 1979 to 1989, if you know your Cold War history, the Soviet Union, then Soviet Union, had its eye blackened in Afghanistan. And that was what we used to refer to as Russia's Vietnam. Right. So there's kind of a myth going on that says that, well, Afghanistan is this graveyard of empires, et cetera, that nobody wins there. It's not exactly entirely true. It may be true as far as Russia is concerned, and that's not something that has actually led to the demise of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had already been bankrupted, not just by this war, but also simultaneously events going on with Mikhail Gorbachev. And if you remember these terms, glasnost and perestroika, and this new openness and that sort of a thing. And then Ronald Reagan's successful psychological warfare against the Russians by convincing Mikhail Gorbachev and their military leadership and planners back then that we had ready to go this entire new, we used to call it Star Wars, remember it was dubbed, which was this space-based laser stuff that, in other words, all of Russia's missiles were going to be obsolete in 5 minutes because all we had to do was zap them from space. And that was going to put Russia into a military competition with us that would have bankrupted. You see, these were the things that led to the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989 to 1991. Here's a little homework for you. I would like you to go, if you haven't seen it, and rent a movie called Charlie Wilson's War. And Charlie Wilson, played by Tom Hanks, of course, as you've probably already seen it, actually it was about the Americans supplying the Afghanis on the ground against the Russians. And so therefore, we were actually to remain in this kind of covert war of warring with communists via what was referred to as the Mujahideen, you see. Many of our wars during the Cold War were like that. They were called proxy wars, right? And actually, well, they were our proxy. The Russians were there directly, okay? A better example of a real proxy war would be the Soviet Union and the North Vietnamese and us and the South Vietnamese. And so the Charlie Wilson's War is a very good thing to watch. As a result of the Mujahideen, which included Osama bin Laden, we had essentially supplied and trained Afghanis how to fight with weapons. And then it turns out that after that, the Afghanis decided that they hated us as much as they hated Russians, because really their point was, we don't want anybody invading our country, you see? And they turned their attention on us. right? It's not quite that simple, but in other ways it is that simple. Now, the biggest thing for me about what's going on right now, there are two aspects of it, geopolitically and sociological, right? For me personally, because I'm a battered women's counselor and I do all the rest of these things, it is incomprehensible to me what is going to be like for women in Afghanistan as of now. You see? And now, if you were old enough as a woman to remember, before the invasion of Afghanistan and the presence of the West, and during much of the nation building that we have done in Afghanistan, has been about the rights of women, right? Trying to put in place a Western style democracy with Western style values. Now, one of the biggest things that people might feel is a folly is the notion, or really the blind arrogance, that a culture like ours would have in going into a different culture that couldn't be more different and convincing them that our way is the best way to do something. You see, now the Taliban has immediately been the antidote for that, because they're immediately going back to Sharia law. You see, so the saddest part for me would be the thought of, let's say you have a young woman in Afghanistan right now. Let's say she's 20 years old, and let's say she grew up in this kind of American influenced, Western Europe influenced society in Afghanistan, where a young girl could actually have aspirations of her own for an education and a level of independence as a legitimate person in her own right, not in context to her status as a woman, as subservient to a man. And that's all she's known. And now it would appear to me that the door is going to be shut, slammed, that those women now will be trapped into this 6th century existence of women not having any status whatsoever. See, so that's the most shocking thing for me. And I'm not blaming that on anybody. I'm just saying that as a counselor, that is something to me that's the most tragic. Now, as an American, as somebody who is a military historian, I would say that geopolitically, that this has been quite a debacle, okay? And I say that because our NATO allies are openly criticizing us. The parliament of the British Parliament has literally censored and rebuked us. China, our most viable political military adversary, who is on the ascendancy, is using this optic of what is going on in Afghanistan as an incredible propaganda tool to prove the weakness, the inner corruption, and the degradation and lack of honor of the West, to tout their own, China's, stability and longevity and ascendance. So in the Cold War, right, in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, emerging nations had a choice of where they were going to get their big brother, right? In other words, where are we going to get our technology? Where are we going to get our investment? Who are we going to align ourselves with and then be subject to them politically and ideologically because of that? And it was either communism in the Soviet Union, or it was the Democratic Republic, the Constitutional Republic of the United States, with the Western values that it implied. You see, Now, in 1991, upon the fall of communist Russia, many people have felt that that kind of war and that kind of way of looking at things was now obsolete, but it's not obsolete anymore. Okay, it is really the same kind of thing now between us and China. China is deeply involved in African nations, in nations everywhere in every hemisphere. And they want to have a foot in and the influence of and the support of all of these nations, emerging nations, that they are going to invest in, that is now going to be giving China a greater footprint across the world. And that's going to be at the direct expense of the United States of America, because we would like to have their alliance and we would like to have influence over them. So you have China ascendant, America, which is collapsing. Now, some people felt that that was inevitable. So therefore, what's the problem? So the United States is just another country. And after World War II, Great Britain just gave up any notion of its empire, and Canada go be Canada, and Australia go be Australia, and India go be India, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then therefore, that's the position that the United States is in right now. That we are going to draw ourselves inward. We're going to work on our own social justice issues and create a social state. But that's one of the larger issues that we have as a nation right now in our own self-identity. Okay, you've all recognized this fight going on. So the question is now, the British don't like the way we've pulled out of Afghanistan. Neither do the French, you see? And it brings us up to what Joe Biden actually sees as his role and what we should do. I mean, do we have an obligation in Afghanistan? Do we have an obligation to the people who fought in Afghanistan? You see? Now, the example I'm going to use here is the one from Vietnam. When we left Vietnam, we had the Paris Accord in 1973. And then, of course, the Congress, our Congress, completely, just to get rid of that hot potato, completely canceled all of the support that we were going to have to the South Vietnamese. Right, so the money dried up, and the South Vietnamese were left with a lot of hardware that we gave them, but it was essentially untenable because we had totally withdrawn, because politically, for us, it was too much of a hot potato, and people wanted to get Vietnam past us, and they wanted to get the whole specter of President Nixon past us. So we just left the South Vietnamese essentially moneyless, from us at least. And the South Vietnamese actually fought pretty hard. But it didn't take long. It was 1975, the summer of 1975, that we witnessed our ignominious retreat with United States Huey helicopters and, you know, the larger helicopters that we have, and all of those scenes of people fleeing the now conquering North Vietnamese down to the Saigon embassy, soon to become Ho Chi Minh City. And people trying to get the hell out of Saigon any way they could. So all of these people who had access to American helicopters and anything else like that, they would fly right off the coast, find an American warship, any American warship out in the Gulf of Tonkin, and they would land, whether they were waving them off or not, because they were desperate. And they would land these helicopters on the landing pads of our ships, no matter what ship it was. And the people would jump out. As far as they were concerned, they were on American soil. And then the soldiers, rather the sailors on our vessels, would just take the helicopters and push them right into the ocean, into the Gulf of Tonkin. This was a black eye for America, all of these refugees running around, because anyone who fought on our side for the South Vietnamese government, who were interpreters, who were soldiers, anybody was marked, of course, for death, or perhaps even worse than death, re-education at the hands of the North Vietnamese forces. You see, so anybody who's old enough to remember these optics, it is particularly painful, I would say, to actually have that particular memory, have its long-healed scab torn off in the fashion that we're witnessing now, right? And
Thanks.
so there's that. We had the Truman Doctrine in 1947. Harry Truman said that we are going to protect nations against other nations that were trying to subvert them from within, right? Now, that, of course, we were talking about the Russians specifically, because in post-World War II Europe, the Russians were poised to take over as many countries as they could. You had the ones that now fell behind the Iron Curtain, but there was a tremendous amount of communist sympathy in a lot of the other countries, not the least of which was France. So we tried to put as much of our influence as we possibly could in those regions. And we understood something during the Truman Doctrine. Churchill and Truman understood something. And what we understood at that point was that when you have a vacuum of power, that it was going to be filled, like Newtonian physics, it was going to be filled. The question is, what is it going to be filled with? In this particular case, in 1947, before Harry Truman's Truman Doctrine speech, all right, announcing this foreign policy, the Greeks and the Turks had an occupying force in their country since World War II, and those were the British. The British, as I told you, being bankrupt as they were just giving up their global ambitions and just looking inwardly to create more of a social safety network in their own country, and that was going to be it, with the understanding that the United States was going to be ascendant. The same position I just described to you a moment ago about us looking inward while China becomes ascendant. Now, the British announced to us in 1947 that, look, we're leaving Turkey and Turkey and Greece. And as soon as we leave Turkey and Greece, you know who's going to fill the vacuum. Immediately, Stalin would have filled that vacuum. So to prevent that backfill, to prevent that vacuum from being filled by the communists, Harry Truman made it the policy of the United States that we would follow up after the British to make sure to maintain those nations with our forces and our military support. And it was going to be an unended, worthwhile effort to stay there and do what we needed to do with whatever investments that we had to make in men and material and time for however long it took to prevent the formation of a communist government there. See, so that's another point of comparison to today. As far as China is concerned, we have some challenges that are coming up right now. If you remember during the Obama administration basically sat back while they watched the Chinese build up what used to be these little tiny specks of land in the South China Sea, which is an enormous area. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of square miles of ocean in the Spratly Island chain and others. And we stood idly by because we didn't want to provoke them, while the Chinese turned these into essentially fortified islands. Like having a fleet of aircraft carriers that are unsinkable, all through one of the world's largest and most important shipping lanes, giving China control over that entire region. And that has been contested. You've probably heard about it. I've done presentations on it. Okay, as a matter of fact, Vice President Harris yesterday was speaking about China pushing people around in that region while we're trying to bolster the Philippines and Vietnam, et cetera, to be on our side and have this coalition against China's bullying, as they put it. You see, another big thing that's coming up, of course, would be, if you've been watching the history of Hong Kong, is that China essentially has totally cracked down on Hong Kong. I can't get into the entire history of Hong Kong here. I've done entire presentations on it, okay? But essentially, Hong Kong has been subdued by the Chinese. And what we're wondering is going to happen now, those who are skeptical of China's intentions and thinking that there's a level of weakness. If the United States now has shown weakness and the desire to get out over all other considerations in a place like Afghanistan, then we likely won't have the will to fight if China makes a move on Taiwan. Will we defend Taiwan? And it's going to take more than just we support Taiwan. All right, it's going to be, it's a potential war. You see, and these are things that people think about if you're a Chinese military strategist, or if you're an American military strategist. I hope that's what you're thinking about. And the Chinese are not going to be the Taliban. You see, so another thing that rocks confidence is that if we couldn't handle the Taliban, then how are we going to handle the Chinese? You see, and China is already making great hay about this, because they're already, as I mentioned earlier, going around to all of the people that we are asking to trust us. And China is saying, you can't trust them. Look what they just did to the Afghanis. They made this promise to all of these people that, the people who helped them, the interpreters, over 20 years and everything. Everybody knows that the Taliban's going to go and chop their heads off and kill their families. Okay. And the Americans were like, well, we're leaving and we're leaving, so, sorry about that. Adios. You see, now I know it's not that simple, but the optic is that, you see. And nobody can deny that in the last week or so that there has been a fantastic effort to try and get people out of this Kabul aircraft, right? Critics would say it's too little, it's too late. And who knows what has happened in current events while we've been sitting here talking about this, okay? But more things. Now, one of the things that informs my way of looking at stuff is these literal hundreds of veterans that I worked intimately with for 27 years, right? I started this off when I was in 1989 working with veterans, and I still had like Pearl Harbor veterans back in those days. They were old then, but they were still there, and they knew that I was in control of creating exhibits about World War II, which I was, and what then in the 1990s became the world's largest naval museum. And their message, they wanted to make sure that I was going to portray history accurately, and they would put their finger in my chest and they would say, make sure that people know that we can never again allow ourselves to be unprepared the way we were at Pearl Harbor. These are from actual people that were on, like, you know, the ships in Pearl Harbor that got bombed, telling me personally, right? So there is very, very deep sentiment. And then obviously the Vietnam veterans and all that implies, right? I have people all the time, and one of the things that I know personally from counseling and everything else like that, and interviewing dozens of Vietnam veterans, that it was psychologically traumatic to be involved in an all-out effort that might involve your life and the lives of all the people around you for something that didn't seem at the end to be something we were that serious about after all. And that is something I feel is a direct template to right now. Now, we have a lot of service people. I don't know if you're aware of this. We've got a lot of service people and folks who are were involved in either in a military sense or somebody who had worked with a personal interpreter in Afghanistan, and they're actually launched a mission that's completely private and outside of the scope of the United States official channels in northern Afghanistan called Digital Dunkirk. And you should look that up if you never heard of that. And so we are trying to, we Americans outside of the government are trying to do, I guess, what they hope the government would do, and actually extricate people out of there. If you don't know the reference of Dunkirk, if you don't know your World War II military history, Dunkirk was the spot where the Germans in their blitzkrieg, right? Another template actually, because nobody expected the Germans to fly over Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg into France, and for France literally to capitulate in 6 weeks. And the entire British Expeditionary Force was trapped on the English Channel at this French port, this town called Dunkirk. And there was this amazing withdrawal that happened because the British were stretched to the max, and they didn't have the capacity to get their expeditionary force out of there. So leaving all their guns and their tanks and their vehicles right on the beach, you had this flotilla of boat owners, private boat owners from Great Britain, go across the English Channel and pick up all of these wounded and other soldiers and bring them back to Great Britain. It's a famous story, but if you see the emotionality about this, it is about a people doing the right thing in concert of getting their people out no matter what. And that's another military point. Whereas if you've been around the military or you've been a soldier, this business of we're not leaving anybody behind, I would rather die trying to get them than stand here and say, well, I don't know, that's kind of dangerous. You know, they shouldn't have been there to begin with. So you see the clash of culture, and it is a different culture. About if you think like, well, let's look at this intellectually and they shouldn't have been there to begin with. I'm talking about Americans. And we asked them to get out months ago and they didn't. And what's the sense of risking American soldiers to get a handful of people over here? You see, it is a cultural difference. And the clash you see right now, which seems to unite Democrats and Republicans, is that I can't believe we just did this. If there's one thing we can agree on is we're not leaving all these Americans behind, and damn the Taliban, we're going to go in there and we're going to get them. And if you get in my way, I'm going to shoot you. Now, whether or not that means that's a product of toxic masculinity or a product of an example of how America is too aggressive, or that's why we're considered the problem in the world, whatever it is, this is an identity crisis that we have in this country. Are we the people who say that we are not going to let everyone behind, you know, because it's not worth it? And what's the point of expending more lives to get these people? And that's just going to create more trouble. You see what I mean? This is a big part of our psychological and cultural clash at the moment. You see? So we've been there for 20 years and we spent $2 trillion. Now, the big question is, right, overall, it's kind of like, what did we set out to do and what wound up being done? You see? So you would say that, well, George W. Bush, we went because we knew that Osama bin Laden was there and this bunch of people that nobody ever heard of before called Al-Qaeda was there. And Al-Qaeda was the one who actually orchestrated via these Saudi Arabian characters that came in here through all of these expired visa permits and somehow managed to walk into flight schools and say, yeah, I want to learn how to fly a 767, but don't bother teaching me how to land or take off. That's not going to be necessary. And somehow not having that raise a red flag. Okay, excuse my cynicism. And but anyway, it was Al-Qaeda. Now, Al-Qaeda is this group, right? This anti-Western group. And they were being hosted by the Taliban. See, that's the thing. So you've got the Afghani country, and then you've got the Afghani government, which is a shell of itself. And then, like I said, the real people who were running the country were the Taliban. So the Taliban invited in Al-Qaeda and let Al-Qaeda have this place in their country, Afghanistan, to run around and train and recruit and do all of that stuff. You see, so it was really not the Taliban we were after, it was Al-Qaeda we were after. But if we were going to get to Al-Qaeda, we had to go through the Taliban. Right. And then, of course, it was the thing that Al-Qaeda was only working and training and existing and planning in Afghanistan because they were under the auspices or the protection of the Taliban. You see? So the question is that even if Al-Qaeda wasn't there, even if ISIS wasn't there, which isn't the case, apparently, it's the Taliban that really made the whole thing possible. So they're accessory, right? So the thing here is about being there for 20 years is twofold. Number one, was it silly to nation build and try to create a, you know, I mean, I don't think that Kabul is ever going to be, Westport, Connecticut, you know? I don't think that that's ever going to happen, you see? Yet at the same time, if you could create a stable situation that was at least quasi-democratic, even if everybody knew it wasn't, you know, but people were able to go to work and people had food and women had the chance to go to school, maybe that wasn't so bad, you see? So the question is, what do you need to do to maintain that versus should we be doing it all at all, right? So when President Biden took office, we had been reduced down to 2,500 troops, which is a rather small nominal force. And it apparently was maintaining the entire status quo, right? Which brings us to now where it was decided to reduce it to 0. Okay, and then we had, with those 2,500 troops, we had all of our military assets still in our possession. We had Bagram Air Force Base, we had built all kinds of Air Force bases and everything else like that in Afghanistan. And during this drawdown, because of the August 31st date, another criticism of the Biden administration, and this would include the Pentagon, et cetera, State Department, under President Biden's control, was that we had made it a priority to get our military hardware out, right? I mean, not the military hardware we were going to leave for the Afghani army, but our troops and everything else like that. So we abandoned bases, we removed everybody, and then in that vacuum, like I was telling you about with the Truman Doctrine, immediately, the Taliban immediately surged into that vacuum, you see? And we wound up with a situation at the Kabul airport where we literally had to surge back in. President Biden immediately authorized 7,000 more troops to go back in just to hold the airport. So the criticism for President Biden was that, should we not have ensured American personnel in the form of our interpreters, our Afghani special immigrant visa people, and American citizens, and then removed the troops, right? So that is something, look, people are going to be writing books about this for decades, okay? Another thing about Afghanistan and China, right? We're on the verge, of course, domestically, and as a big part of the Biden administration, and many of the things that were popular about the Biden approach as far as environmentalism is concerned, is that we are mandated now, or it's going to be the policy of the Biden administration, at least, to make sure that half the vehicles on the road, and by 2030, we're going to be completely electric vehicles. Now, if you know anything about electricity, I happen to be a licensed electrician in the state of Connecticut, E2 journeyman. You can call me if you want a light bulb screwed in or something. And those batteries require rare earth minerals. Now, who has a whole pile of rare earth minerals waiting to be mined? Well, guess what? It's in Afghanistan. You see? So who now is going to be in control of all of those rare earth minerals? This is almost like back to colonial days, right? Where foreign countries came in and they took over the country and they had control of the resources. Now, it certainly looks like that may well be China. So therefore, China will have a literal monopoly on rare earth minerals that are going to be the building blocks of the entire economy going forward. I don't know if you were aware of that. All right, I'm going to go to the chat room. I've seen a couple of things come in. Lauren, you want to jump in?
Sure. We have a few questions in the chat, and we also have a few questions that were emailed to me. So I'll start with the biggest one that's been emailed to me a lot of times, which is, what should I be doing to help? I am going to send out an email at the end of the program with some legitimate organizations that you can donate to. So the first question that is in the chat: who is responsible for turning from punishing those who attacked the US on 9/11 to trying to nation build?
Oh, everybody. We've got 4 presidents who were involved in that. The least of which is the last president, and maybe President Trump, but certainly George W. Bush and Barack Obama. So that was 8 years and 8 years. And another interesting thing, by the way, is from the standpoint of Joe Biden and saying that, hey, what do you want from me? I inherited this. Joe Biden, as vice president, had a large hand in everything that was part of this whole thing that he now says he inherited while he was vice president for 8 years. Just a point, okay? Now, as far as revenge, you see, if that, I believe that's the word that was used. If you remember 9/11, it was highly emotional. It was highly emotional for me because I'm a kid from New York. I was born in New York City. And in my career working, I worked in the Twin Towers, right? So if you're a New Yorker, it's kind of like, not only did this happen to America, but it was kind of like the terrorist attacks that happened by those two guys with the pressure cookers at the Boston Marathon. Okay, it was like you messed with the wrong city. You know what I mean? It was personal, right? So from the 9/11 attacks, it kind of had that smack to me also. So there was a lot of reactivity to it, as you know. And the question is like what the hell happened here? You know, and then we had to take our heads out of our butts to a large degree, because if you remember, if you know your history, you know that the World Trade Center had already been attacked, right? If you remember that big bomb and all the rest of that, you see. So we were in the middle of a peace dividend after in the late 1990s because of two things. Number one, the fall of the Soviet Union, and supposedly the end of, hey, there's nobody left to fight now, right? So therefore, it's like we have something called a peace dividend. We don't have to worry about it. We can reallocate all of these resources and money. And it was right at remember the computer boom in the 1990s, right? You've got mail. Remember that? Dial-up modems. I mean, that took our energy, and that took our, I mean, it was straight up from here, you see? And while we were all focused on all of that, and there was nobody left to fight, we had this brewing thing going on that had somebody look they would have seen, which metastasized into Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, right? Now, after 9/11, the idea, as I said, going into Afghanistan was that that's where Osama bin Laden was, right? Because we had named a face of this thing. And number two, it was to deny a safe haven for the Taliban to allow another terrorist group, either Al-Qaeda or some other group like Al-Qaeda, to be a safe haven for terrorists to plan another attack. So the idea was to go there and garrison that nation. Garrison means leaving a force there. Just like Harry Truman did in 1947 to make sure the communists didn't come in. And we were going to make sure that the bad guys didn't fill the vacuum anymore, right? That the Taliban was not going to be able to allow Al-Qaeda or ISIS or anybody else like that to form another basis of attack against us. Now, 20 years ago, you needed a place to come and congregate and everything else like that. You know, 20 years ago was 20 years ago. I mean, you had cell phones and you had, you know, computers, but not like we have today. Today, like we're doing right now, you know, we're Zooming. It doesn't really matter where you were. If you were on the space shuttle or something like that, you could be on the Zoom call. It doesn't matter, you see. But back in 2001, 2002, 2003, you really still needed a concrete meeting room, and you needed to have centralized locations. So it became important for us to go there and stay there. And we went there with our coalition forces, which is another thing that's a smack against the international community that allied with us in Afghanistan, that's angry with us now, which is that the British, etc., they all sympathized with us, the United States, after 9/11 and in this global war on terror. And they had their own sense of morals of what we were doing. That's why the British are so angry. And the British had their own sense of morals of what we were doing in Afghanistan these 20 years, because we were there, and the British, and rather the Afghanis, to the risk of their own families and their own necks, actually helped the United States and the NATO forces. In the form of interpreters and informants, and everybody there was working on the assumption of the honorable truth that we were going to protect all those people. Because if we were to disappear all of a sudden, everybody knows that the Taliban would rush in and immediately kill their entire family and them. And then at the end, that's kind of what happened. You see, so the British are upset that we unilaterally, by ourselves, created this arbitrary timeline, August 31st, and boom, we're out, and nobody really consulted with the British or anybody else. And the British now are upset because they went in there to align themselves with the United States. And what the British now are saying is that apparently, at least the current administration's values about what we just did in Afghanistan and are doing in Afghanistan do not match the values that we went in there to support by being a part of this for 20 years. You see? Now, the damaging part of this is that one would have to ask themselves, how did a bunch of people in the Biden administration, who are obviously and arguably so damned smart, and I don't mean that in a sarcastic way, I mean, you got a bunch of people who are ripping smart, you know, Rhodes Scholars, intellectuals, and all the rest of that. Yet they were, the term is usually tone deaf or blind to what is actually going on and what the sentiments would be about this. And that was a major disconnect, a major blunder, I would say. And so it was, the optics have been absolutely horrible coming out of this White House. And they've done a good job mopping up and cleaning up on aisle 4. But you had the Pentagon spokesperson come out and give you this set of numbers. And then you had the State Department would come out and say, well, no, it's really this. And then you had the president who would come out and say something completely different, you see? And then they would spin it the next day. And then they would spin it the third day, you see? Now, I'm not saying that it's somehow Joe Biden or the Democrats. I mean, the job of the administration is to spin in favor of the political objectives and longevity of their own team. It's just the way politics are. It's just the way politics are, all right? And everybody's got their spin cycle, et cetera, but President Biden happens to be the person who's the president. He sought the presidency. He has attained the presidency. And as he eloquently said in his own words, the buck stops here. And I think that history will remember it as such. Right? So we didn't go there for revenge, although I think there was probably an element of revenge to it. Okay. Now, if that's a misguided part of our national character, that'll be the subject of some other discussion. All right. I mentioned that this whole thing is going to be a shot in the arm to the global jihad. I also want to remind you that another big comparison, and I see the other questions in the chat room, okay, I just want to follow up with a couple of things, is that there's been this false argument, and the false argument, and this just came in on news, explosions rock Kabul, more than a dozen dead. You know, so I don't know if there are more things that have happened, but like I said, we're in a new phase right now. And the thing is that there's been this notion, and we call this a straw man argument in debates, right? Where you give this false alternative to what you just did. And to my mind, the false alternative is that Joe Biden made this case, and I disagree with him in his approach to this, is that, well, either we leave or we have to go back to war or remain at war. You see, now I don't consider the 2,500 troops at war. The situation was stable. We had the Afghani government, we had people living their lives, we had whatever degree of a Western style rights for women, et cetera, going on there. You see, so I see the notion as like either we pull everybody out and we have no presence there whatsoever, or we have to go back to war. And Joe Biden says, well, You know, how many more generations of people have to fight there? Now, everybody agrees that, you know, it would be great not to have a war in Afghanistan. My point to you is one where I'm saying, how do you know when you need to leave a maintenance of troops there for the sake of stability? You see? And you say, well, why should we do that? I point you to Exhibit A, Japan. All right, the United States immediately occupied Japan, and we literally ran the country for 5 straight years after the Japanese surrender in 1945. In that case, we recreated, because it was a complete defeat of Japan, of course, we recreated that into more of a different society, a non-militaristic society, et cetera. One that was going to not be a militarized country in the future, right? And we, I remind you, have troops in Japan and Okinawa to this day. How many years has it been since 1945, ladies and gentlemen? Does anybody here think that we should remove everyone from Okinawa and Japan? How about South Korea? How many people are defending the demilitarized zone and have been since the armistice in 1953? Everybody knows that if we leave, we take our garrison force, et cetera, defending the demilitarized zone, that there will be war in Korea, because the war is not over. It was just an armistice. Exhibit C, Germany. Like Japan, we've been there since 1945 as a force against the Russians in the model of communist expansionist Russia. Right now, it's ironic, I think, because the former president, Donald Trump, felt that we shouldn't have that many troops there because the threat from Russia is not what it was. Plus, it was costing us a fortune. And that the Europeans are rich enough to invest in a greater share of their own defense, NATO countries, particularly Germany. Now, Joe Biden came in and he immediately canceled that order, and he made sure that the maximum amount of troops remained in Germany. Yet he did the opposite as far as Afghanistan is concerned. So I'll leave you with that to think about, all right? Now, as far as people saying, well, Joe Biden, and he said this himself, that's why I'm bringing it up, well, my hands were tied, Joe Biden, and my administration's hand were tied, because here's a policy, an agreement that my former president made to get out of there in 2021. So what am I going to do? Well, I just remind people that President Biden had no problem tearing up every other agreement that Donald Trump ever made regarding the border, the policies, every single thing. If Donald Trump did it, it was enough of a reason to do the opposite. Yet somehow this one issue was something that couldn't be touched, and the administration's hands are tied. To my mind, that's a red herring. Okay, more questions.
Why would we use Kabul airport and not reopen Bagram?
Well, because we don't want to provoke them. That's why. Because apparently Joe Biden does not want to create another provocation, and Joe Biden does not want to be the president who reignited another war in Afghanistan. You know, so these are all heavy political calculations, and they're based on the man. And it's hard to know Joe Biden because he's been so carefully choreographed. Right? There's not a thing that Joe Biden says that hasn't gone through 10 layers of focus group testing about the right terminology and him being in front of a teleprompter. So you don't really know. So one of the interesting things about me as a psychotherapist is now in situations where Joe Biden can be really Joe Biden, we're actually seeing who Joe Biden really is. And he appears in my personal assessment to be somebody who has felt historically to not to have thought that we should have been in Afghanistan to begin with. Joe Biden historically was against the President Obama's decision to go for the SEAL Team 6 raid to get Osama bin Laden. He was against the surge that had to occur in Iraq. So he doesn't think that we should be expending our forces in these ways. And to take Bagram Airport would require a confrontation with the new status quo. So instead of looking at it from the standpoint of, military honor or this sort of a thing, which would have been a very Trumpian thing to do, Joe Biden is taking more of an intellectual, long approach and saying, yeah, this is messy, but this is going to be over. And this is all my just opinion. And we're going to get this new, infrastructure deal we're going to pump another $5 trillion into the economy, and people are going to be getting checks, and people are going to be getting free healthcare, and they're going to forget all about this. Now, that's my own 2 cents. You see what I mean? But I have to look at this from the standpoint of where is Biden coming from? And what is he doing? I'm not in his head. He's not here. I can't ask him. But I am a psychotherapist for many years, and I do these things professionally. Now, nobody wants to be psychoanalyzed, and certainly not from a distance. Okay. But I have to ask myself, what are President Biden's motivations? I don't mean that they're wrong. I mean, I believe that President Biden thinks he's doing the right thing. He said himself that history will show that I was on the right side of this. And he's right that history will show whatever side he was on, but he is a man who has decided what his convictions are, and he is the president of the United States. And I'm afraid it's his prerogative. Okay, see, he's not going into Bagram. Okay, and his own generals told him to do things differently, but he made the call. And he has said this in his own words. So from the standpoint of honor, or somebody standing up for his own principles, which President Biden apparently does or has, like I said, he's the president and he's the commander in chief, and he gets to call the shots in these regards. And history will tell the tale of whether or not he was on the right side of this or not. Next.
Why didn't we start evacuating people from Afghanistan much earlier?
Well, that's one of the biggest criticisms of the Biden administration. And now you see Jen Psaki, et cetera, she was there saying, well, we sent out these notices to people, and well, maybe they just want to stay there, or people have a lot of reasons why they don't want to leave. So all of these people that are going to be left behind, or that they're in this situation right now, because you don't want to call them stranded, because Jen Psaki scolded a reporter who said that they were stranded, because that sounds like too much like they're stranded, you see? So you can't use that word. So we're in a real game of semantics here. And the point is that people are asking, the average person is asking, why didn't we prioritize getting American citizens out and other people with special visas out, and then remove the military? So one of the biggest criticisms of the administration is that, why did you remove all of the military? And that the people who had to get out were like practically an afterthought. It would appear to me that nobody thought any of this was going to happen. And like I said to you, in defense of Joe Biden, is, the intelligence community has handed various administrations a number of duds, right? So I'm not blaming the intelligence community. I'm not blaming Joe Biden. We don't know who's at fault. There's going to be a lot of finger pointing and a lot of heads that are going to be rolling. All right, people already think, if you're of this opinion, that General Milley already should have resigned, or some such thing. Time will tell. why this was done. I'm sure that somebody's going to write a book and it's going to say that we told President Biden that this is the way it should be done. And he said that, no, August 31st, I want it done. You see, so the military actually started taking everything apart and they just essentially just abandoned things and walked away to get out of there to meet this deadline with the expectation that Afghanistan was not going to fall to the Taliban as fast as it did. And so it wasn't going to be an issue, but because what they had either A, planned for or lack of plan for, or B, what the intelligence failure were, or C, what the decision-making failure were, and this would be on President Biden, led us to a situation where this became an emergency. Next question.
So the last question that we have, and before I even ask this question, I just want to say, if you think of something after the program, if you think of something that's too personal and you want to reach out to Arthur, either as a historian or a counselor, please let me know. You can reply to that Zoom invitation that I sent you, and I always get those messages to Arthur. So the last question came in through an email. It says, as a counselor, what are long-term ramifications of removing opportunities and oppressing women?
Well, I think that the biggest casualty, not as an individual, but in politics, then I'll go to the individual part. This is a black eye for not only this administration, but the progressive project that has been embodied in the democratic platform in our country, because social justice and women's rights and social justice rights have been at the forefront of the talking points and the prioritization in this administration. The selection of a woman of color who was a female was a priority and a promise of Joe Biden. And I think that a big problem here is that that cause has been damaged by what we just allowed to let happen. Because I think that everyone would agree that the rights of women and other social justice causes in Afghanistan have a very bleak future. Now, I think that politically, that is something that's going to be very difficult to recover from. Okay? It was only a month ago when we were flying a gay pride flag underneath the American flag at the American embassy in Afghanistan, right? I don't think that the Taliban was very impressed with our promotion of LGBTQ plus values as something that they should adhere to. As far as personally is concerned, as a counselor, I think that my primary point, as I mentioned to you earlier, went to the veterans of this war, of the Afghani war, which there have been generations of. And in other words, parallel to Vietnam, if we left in such a manner where apparently, well, we're done with this and we shouldn't have been there to begin with, right? So if you're sitting there with a prosthetic leg that you gave up for something that you believed was of value, that your country told you was of value, and now you're told post facto, well, you know, man, we was a mistake, we shouldn't have been there, that was a dumb idea, then that means you lost your leg for nothing. That is serious stuff, psychologically. Do you know what the suicide rate is for returning soldiers and veterans? Look it up. And this is similar to the phenomenon that we experienced in the mental health profession for the 30 years after Vietnam. we didn't redeem our sense of military competence and foreign policy competence after Vietnam until the Persian Gulf War of 1991, where we made sure that we had a set level of parameters of why we were there, what we were there to do, and how we were going to get out, accepting nothing less than victory. And now we're in the same exact place, even worse than at the end of Vietnam, as far as Americans' direction and credibility is concerned. Okay, so that's for foreign policy. As far as I think psychologically, the biggest problem is going to be, as far as women's rights is concerned, is anybody who cares about not just about people, but just about, not just about women, but just about people. It's I said to you, one of the most shocking things for me was to consider the notion of what it might be like for a young woman in Afghanistan right now who grew up with at least the promise of, some kind of self-identified future, to be now thrown back into this 7th century kind of existence where women are essentially property. Now, the Taliban says that we're the new Taliban. Now, you know what that means. Sitting there is about as much as I know what that means, sitting there. And their spokesperson came out and says, no, we're looking forward to contributing to the fight against global terrorism, which I find to be laughable. And also we're concerned about global warming. So I don't know if the global warming thing is that was a sop to us, so that anybody who's interested in global warming must be good automatically. But the Taliban are people that I would say that their actions are going to speak louder than their words. And we will have to wait and see. Now, unfortunately, they had to be dealt with. I don't fault President Biden for dealing with the Taliban, because you have to deal with the Taliban if you're going to get something done in Afghanistan. I don't fault President Trump for dealing with the Taliban, because if you're going to get something done in Afghanistan, you have to deal with the Taliban. Okay, the question would be going forward, is the Taliban going to be recognized and legitimized as a real government, and with the accolades and the credibility therein? Okay, and that will probably be coming from somebody like China, if it happens. Ladies and gentlemen, you know very well that I could do this for another hour and a half. Luckily for you, we're out of time.
I want to say a huge thank you to Arthur for being here, as well as everybody who attended the program today. I know that this was a very, very difficult topic. We are so used to having Arthur come and bring history into the present. This was new to us, having him bring these current events into the historical context, and I want to say thank you for doing that. As always, I'll send up a follow-up email that has a little bit more additional information. We had a lot of questions that came in through email about what we as citizens, as people, can be doing to help. So I've organized a list that I will send out to everybody about some legitimate places where you can donate and some of the things that they need. So thank you everybody for being here. I'm already seeing the registrations for Arthur's American Revolution series come through my inbox. So you can look at our website if you want to sign up for that program, which our next session is next Wednesday. So thank you everybody.
Thank you for hosting this.
You're welcome.
No, I'm serious. Thank you for hosting this. It was, Lauren said, we have a lot of people asking, and the library and the Friends of the Library decided to put this together, and they asked me to do it. So I'm thanking you, and I'm pleased to be part of it.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you so much for being here, and for everyone who attended, have a great afternoon.